It's easy to believe anything you see or read online, but not everything you see on the internet is true. In fact, some of it might be very wrong, so how do we know what to trust? Well, there's no single answer to that question, but we'll explore several strategies for evaluating online information. Let's dive in. A few years ago, a photo began circulating online showing a metal replica of an ancient Roman helmet covered in grass, leaves, and moss. It looked incredibly realistic. Some people even thought it was a real artifact. But if you look closely, you'll notice something strange. The helmet is marked with the logo of a popular brand of barbecue grills. The image was just an advertisement for those grills. But it raises an important question. How do we know if something we see online is real or fake? Well, one way to figure that out is to think about the source of the content. Is it coming from a credible website or an unknown source? Does the person posting the content have expertise on the topic? For example, if you're looking for information on artificial intelligence, you'd probably want to find a source that specializes in AI news and research rather than someone who posts about gardening and cooking. You should also consider whether the source has a bias or an agenda. For instance, if you're trying to decide which brand of phone to buy, you might want to be cautious if the review seems a bit too positive. The reviewer might be getting paid by the phone company to say nice things about their product. All of these questions help us evaluate the credibility of the source. If it's not clear whether we can trust the source, then we should be more careful about believing what we find. Evaluating sources is especially important when we're reading news online. When I was in college, almost every story I read about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict seemed to blame Israel. At first, I thought maybe I was just seeing things. But then I realized that most of the websites I was reading from were based in the Middle East, where many people don't like Israel very much. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it made me wonder, am I getting a balanced perspective on this conflict, or am I only hearing one side of the story? So I started checking other sources to see what they were saying. And I found that many American and European newspapers reported on the conflict in different ways. This taught me an important lesson about reading the news. It's important to check multiple sources to make sure we're getting the full story. We can also use websites that gather news from around the world like Google News, which allows us to compare headlines and stories from different outlets. Of course, just because a source is credible doesn't mean that everything it publishes is automatically true. Sometimes sources make mistakes, or they might try to trick us. So it is important to develop our critical thinking skills and be prepared to question what we see and read online. One way to do that is to look for warning signs that something might be wrong. For example, if we see a headline that claims something shocking, we should be more careful about believing it. Headlines like these are called clickbait, and they redesigned to trick us into clicking on them so that the website can make money. So if you see a headline that says something crazy like "man survives plane crash" and immediately grows a second head, you should take some time to think about whether it's true. What are the odds that a man would survive a plane crash and also grow a second head? Pretty low, right? We can also look out for grammatical errors and spelling mistakes because if a website can't be bothered to proofread their articles, it might be a sign that they're not very trustworthy. Finally, we should be wary of sources that use emotional language to try to convince us of something. For example, a website that says scientists prove God exists is probably not credible because scientists don't use the word prove when talking about things like God's existence. Science relies on evidence and testing, but you can't test whether God exists. A claim like this is more an example of faith than science. Okay, so let us say we've found a credible source and it doesn't contain any obvious warning signs. What should we do next? Well, we should continue to ask questions. One helpful strategy is to ask who, what, where, when, why, and how. These questions help us dig deeper and explore the topic more fully. For For example, if we read a news article about a scientific discovery, we might ask who conducted the study, what did they investigate, where was the study conducted, when was it conducted, why was the study done, and how were the results analyzed. Answering these questions will help us better understand the context of the discovery and determine its significance. Asking questions also helps us identify gaps in our knowledge and figure out what else we need to learn. For example, if we read an article about climate change, we might learn that global temperatures are rising faster than expected. We might then start wondering what factors are causing this trend. By asking this question, we discover that human activities such as burning fossil fuels and deforestation are major contributors to climate change. Another effective way to evaluate online information is to look for supporting evidence. Good sources will provide citations and links to other resources so that we can verify the information we find. For example, if we read an article about a new medical treatment, we should look for references to studies and clinical trials that support the claims made in the article. We could then read the studies and trials ourselves to confirm the findings and understand the methods used to collect the data. Checking for supporting evidence is a great way to ensure that the information we find is accurate and reliable. Finally, let's talk about the importance of reflecting on our own biases and perspectives. It's easy to fall into echo chambers online, where we're only exposed to information that confirms our existing beliefs. For example, if you're scrolling through social media and you post something controversial like pineapple doesn't belong on pizza, you might only see comments from people who agree with you because the algorithm is showing you what it thinks you want to see. That's a problem because it prevents us from learning about different perspectives and challenging our own assumptions. That's why it's important to reflect on our own biases and be open to considering different points of view. We can ask ourselves questions like, are there other ways to interpret this information? Am I missing any important details, or am I jumping to conclusions? By reflecting on our own biases and perspectives, we can become more aware of the limitations of our own thinking and be more open to considering the validity of different viewpoints. These are just a few strategies we can use to evaluate online information. There are many others. And it's important to remember that no single approach is foolproof. Evaluating online information is an ongoing process that requires vigilance, curiosity, and a willingness to confront our own biases. But by developing these skills, we can become more informed and engaged citizens and better equipped to navigate the complexities of the digital age. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching.